Welcome, everybody, to the Utah Stories Hidden Utah podcast. Today, we do have a very hidden Utah episode. We're talking about 5 stories that the mainstream media does not want you to know. And with all due respect to my colleagues in the media, I want to say local journalists, by and large, most journalists that I know, do a really great job uncovering truth. And they are not agenda-driven. They are not biased. They are not deliberately convoluting or covering facts or throwing up smoke screens. But I have to say, especially on a national level, I feel like that is happening. And in some cases, locally as well, but not because it's being deliberately hidden from us, but because the proper research and digging, investigative journalism is not happening. And today, on today's episode, I want to share with you 2, in particular, very important local stories that are just not getting enough coverage for the potential damage and fallout that these things will cause to the greater part of Utah. So I'm really excited to share those with you. But before I get to those, I want to tell you about Canyon Meadows grass-fed beef. If you have not yet tried Canyon Meadows grass-fed beef, I have to say it is absolutely a step above most grass-fed beef you've tried. I have a friend who is a big game hunter. He only eats, venison and antelope and elk, and he's a great hunter. He's tried Canyon Meadows at my house, and he says it's absolutely exceptional. They never buy store-bought meat like we don't. We don't buy factory farm beef anymore. I don't disparage people who buy grain-fed beef. Some people actually prefer it. Places like steakhouses, sometimes they'll say it's better. But if you try grass-finished beef where the beef has been eating all its life, these beautiful, lush pastures, thick, amazing grasses that are all native Utah grasses, you're actually eating something very close to what you would get if you were eating big game. It's not very different than if you're eating elk, and elk is obviously one of the most healthy meats you can eat. But you just got to go check them out, see for yourself. Let me know how it tastes to you. I became a convert years ago. I love smoking their meat because it's so tender, and even without a lot of spices, you get so much flavor in it. But if you use the offer code Utah Stories, tell them you found them here, you can save up to $50 on your first box of meat, box of steaks, or your briskets. So go there right now at cmrbeef.com. Don't forget, go there before the holidays because they can run low on supplies. You can want to put your orders in right now for your Christmas dinners. Okay, so I want to tell you about our first story. The first story is a national story, and I just think that this story is indicative of what's going on. I mean, it really demonstrates the level of corruption that we're finding in the mainstream media. The great reporter who broke the Edward Snowden NSA classified information story, his name is Glenn Greenwald. He quit his job at The Intercept because they told him 6 weeks before the election that the Hunter Biden story was Russian disinformation, and he absolutely could not report on it. He knew that it was not Russian disinformation, that everything that had come out about Hunter Biden was true, and that was factual information that the mainstream media was convoluting into making the greater public believe was Russian disinformation. So what happened right before, if you remember, about the end of October, a laptop was recovered a year prior to that by the FBI. The FBI just sat on it, but Rudy Giuliani got a hold of the laptop. It had all this information about what the dealings the Biden family had with China and how basically Hunter Biden received a $5 million gift from China riding on Air Force Two that for all intents and purposes looks like just free money. And so that wasn't allowed to be reported by The Intercept. As you know, it was blocked by Twitter. All links that were going to that story, even from the presidential press agent's Twitter account, that was blocked because it was just deemed by big tech, big media, everyone as nothing other than Russian disinformation. Now, the media is finally reporting on that. We are finally finding out that, in fact, there is a big investigation going on into Hunter Biden. That there is there's a case that's moving forward, and a lot of people are going to be wrapped up in this, possibly President-elect Joe Biden himself. So the reason why this is important is not because you probably already know all the information. It's because the most trusted, the most honest, the reporters that have the most integrity are now quitting because they are not being allowed to report on the truth. I just find it a very sad state of affairs because you are owed the truth. You, the buying public, who tune in, who the media companies benefit from, the eyeballs and the advertisements they put in front of your eyes. You are owed the truth, and it's about time we set the bar higher and basically show our displeasure with what's going on here. Okay, and so the next story concerns what I consider this good old boys club that exists in Utah politics. If you've not lived in Utah very long, if you're not familiar with the landscape and the political environment we are in, what we find here is that the LDS Church and members of the church, they're all fine people, but what often happens is that it's a corruption of a very specific form. It's a corruption where people use their influence and power and their friendships to basically monopolize the buying public and do a lot of deals in back rooms, behind closed doors, and very secretively. And if you don't know about the inland port, that's something I highly suggest you go back and watch one of our podcasts where we talk to the inland port yes man. It's essentially a new PR guy who's brought in from Texas to basically sell people on the idea of the inland port being just this wonderful, green, renewable, somehow great for the environment project. The reality of the situation with the inland port is that it is designed to create a hub for a destination for international flights to come with cargo and unload that cargo so they don't have to go through customs in places like LA or New York. So they would be able to unload the cargo, and then we would be a hub where we go out to more local destinations such as Denver, Kansas City, Phoenix, LA, wherever trucks are going. The problem with the inland port is where they are building it. So the Great Salt Lake is a massive, expansive area. It takes up thousands and thousands of acres. And on the shores of the Great Salt Lake are huge mosquito colonies. And the birds will stop and they will eat the mosquitoes who are basically migrating from other parts of the country. And these mosquitoes are essential for the birds to have a food source as they are migrating across our country. And it's like the Great Salt Lake is the biggest stopping area for migratory birds, and it is the biggest mosquito colony west of the Mississippi. And everybody hates mosquitoes, but the larvae, especially of the mosquitoes, are food for birds. So anyway, they don't want you to know about that. They want you to ignore that they're going to have to use thousands upon thousands of pounds of additional mosquito abatement to kill off all these mosquitoes so these dock workers aren't just eaten alive. They're already having to do that because of where they chose to build the prison. The new prison is out there on the north eastern shore of the Great Salt Lake, and the inland port area is right around there as well. And this deal has gone through without any support or any calls for input from voters, from Salt Lake City residents. And the reason why I find this so interesting, the way this has sort of been glanced over by our media, our local media, is there was a very important court case going forward when, as Jackie Biskupski, our former mayor, was heading out of office. That court case was Salt Lake City suing Utah for saying they did not have the jurisdiction to be the jurisdiction or power to be telling Salt Lake City residents that this inland port was going to occupy Salt Lake City land and essentially annexing Salt Lake City land into state unincorporated land. That court case went through, it died, and then everybody forgot about it. That was, and I do not understand, and I actually love to hear from a legal scholar. I'm not a legal scholar. How is it that that court case had no power? Why didn't it proceed? Because we, the voting public in Salt Lake City, should have the final say over what happens in our city. If our city is going to become this massive hub for distribution, polluting our air, making us all more sick, and in addition to that, killing our wetlands migratory area for the birds, which we value as well, why don't we have a say over that? Why don't we have an interest in that? So state leaders are now kind of scrambling, trying to, clean this thing up, but still make it go away. And I think it's about time we learn more and we keep hammering this inland port is a terrible idea. We don't need the jobs. We don't need the pollution. We don't need the mosquito abatement. We don't need the harm that it will certainly have cause on our environment and our own health. Okay, so I want to tell you about my final big story. And it's a local story. But before I do, I want to tell you about Green Bikes. If you haven't heard about Green Bikes, what it is it's a local nonprofit bike share program that connects employment and residential centers to transit stops and popular entertainment destinations. Green Bike seeks to improve community health, air quality, and increase the use of existing transit infrastructure. Green Bike is a local nonprofit public-private partnership between Salt Lake City, the Utah Transit Authority, Select Health, and other private sponsors. To date, Green Bikers have removed 5.8 million vehicle miles from local roads, prevented more than 5 million pounds of CO2 from entering our air, all while burning 76 million calories in the process. That's 267,000 slices of pizza. To learn more about Green Bike and find out how you can take as many rides as you want for less than 20 cents a day, follow Green Bike on social media at SLC Bike Share or visit greenbikeslc.org. It's like the most green way you can clean our air is actually not an electric vehicle or a Prius. It's a bike. Just get on a bike, get on a Green Bike, and you will be cleaning our air. All right, so this is a really interesting story that I stumbled on. The AP News actually covered it, but I have not seen any more news about it. A corrupted Utah state leader who may have tainted Utah's medical cannabis program. I think we've just sort of scratched the surface on this guy. His name is Kerry Gibson. And this one story written by the AP, I think there might have been a follow-up story by the Tribune, was released about 2 weeks ago, then nothing since then. But I believe there is so much more to report on concerning this guy. He was the former Weber State County Commissioner. Under his stewardship, Kerry Gibson of Kerry Gibson ranchers, the Utah Stories have spoken to. You might have remembered our story we released last week about how ranchers are having their water stolen in Ogden Valley. They are telling us that Kerry Gibson became indeed a darling of state GOP leaders. And how he became this darling is what I find very interesting. And that all these mansions were approved to be built in this one area where a lot of developers were getting super wealthy. And then suddenly this guy is now the new GOP state darling, headed like on a rocket ship for Congress. But his plans were thwarted because he was just too corrupt. So what happened was during his tenure in Weber as the Weber County Commissioner, the conditions were improved for his own family dairy farm, where Weber County paid a huge sum of money to install a big drainage ditch. So in the lower Weber County basin, there is a flood problem, and it costs a lot of money for farmers to have to deal with that. They installed a giant, massive concrete ditch on his property, and while other farmers who had their farms flooded weren't not getting the same government largesse that he was receiving. So, but not long after he was at the helm of the Weber County, he got a job at the Department of Agriculture. He brought with him two ladies who worked at his PR department, at his PR firm. The group was called the DCO Group, and the ladies were named Natalie Callahan and another woman who was not nearly as involved, who was part-time. But Callahan was very much involved. Gibson and Callahan attended a conference in Hawaii. Callahan took the liberty to upgrade the seats on the plane by special bonus of the Utah taxpayers. She upgraded their rooms, also on the dime of Utah taxpayers. She was billing dozens upon dozens of extra overtime hours. She was collecting huge sums for her position as Director of Operations and Agriculture Programs. Utah Stories has also learned that Callahan was also taking the liberties of firing people who had been with the department for years. She was just coming in, firing them, and then silencing anybody who might have complaints over the ways in which things were being operated. So it became a very hostile work environment at the Utah Department of Agriculture. This was all when the medical cannabis program was being rolled out. So was that a coincidence that Gibson was brought in when this massive, huge program of both industrial hemp and medical cannabis were being brought into the State Department of Agriculture? I would really like to get to the bottom of that, because I think he might have been brought in for a reason. But what they have uncovered in this state audit, luckily an audit was done, was that they were Gibson, who shouldn't have been involved at all in the selection process of the farms that were being chosen, or the farmers that were being chosen to get that highly coveted medical cannabis license. Gibson was showing up. He was like, he's the helm. He has his underlings deciding, as the committee members who were deciding who was going to get those medical cannabis permits. He was going out to these farms and personally meeting with these farmers. And there was one operation that was in question in northern Utah. The only operation that's doing medical cannabis in northern Utah is called True North. It's being examined whether or not they were indeed qualified to receive their license, because they might have paid out. I can't speculate there, but there might have been some corruption there. We will find out more, I hope, as this audit examines more this, what they call applicant A, but basically it says that they might have received their growing license without merit. And hopefully there's going to be more done on that. There was only 8 licenses handed out. As we know, now 1 year into the medical cannabis program in Utah, there is not nearly enough medical grade cannabis being produced in Utah. One single grower is producing like 70% of all the medical cannabis for the state needs. We're failing the patients. I mean, there's basically one grower who is in Sanpete County, who Utah Stories wrote about in our health and wellness issue. I suggest you check that farm out and that story out. It's an amazing thing what they've done. Dragonfly is that grower. They have a really incredible facility. If you want to read that story, you can go visit utahstories.com. We'll also link to that in the show notes. So what I want to get into now is a national story, and I know I'm getting out of my lane a bit, but I have to get into this a little bit because as much as the mainstream media wants to nail all those final nails in the Donald Trump presidency coffin, it just seems those nails won't stay shut. And if you're if you're like an outside observer like I am, all I hope for is that every single allegation of election fraud is investigated. Right now, if you're on YouTube, you cannot make claims that there was widespread election fraud. And I'm not claiming it. And I listen to other podcasters who really tiptoe along that line, not going there, not going to say there was widespread election fraud. But what I encourage all listeners to do, whether you're on the left or whether you're on the right, is at least begin to examine what the allegations are and who the witnesses are. Because the latest one, this is after the time when supposedly Joe Biden has now received all the votes from the Electoral College. He's even been congratulated by Mitch McConnell in Senate. What they have uncovered just recently really, really begins to look like a smoking gun. And they're trying to discredit this report. This is the report. Allied Security Operation Group was hired to conduct a election report on what's going on with the Dominion voting machines. So obviously the whole notion that this was a Venezuelan company, that Venezuela had used this system to rig their elections for years, I wasn't about to just say, oh yeah, that's got to be it. They just hired the ex-Hugo Chavez people to help them rig the election. But here's what they did. So they hired Allied Security Operation Group. They're called Antrim Michigan Forensic. This is called the Antrim Michigan Forensic Report. The judge allowed this company to come in and just do a forensic analysis of the machines. And let me read the beginning of this report to you. It says, "My name is Russell James Ramsland, Jr. I'm a resident of Dallas County, Texas. I hold an MBA from Harvard University and a political science degree from Duke University. I've worked with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, among other organizations, and I have run businesses all over the world, many of which are highly technical in nature. I have served on technical government panels. I'm also part of the management team of Allied Security Operations Group, LLC. ASOG is the group of globally engaged professionals who come from various disciplines to include the Department of Defense, Secret Service, Department of Homeland Security. So he does technical operations for the government. Highly, highly technical operations. He is the one who wrote this report. I don't think you could discredit this guy at all. The purpose of this forensic audit is to test the integrity of the Dominion voting system and how it performed in Antrim County, Michigan. Now, this is the smoking gun part, so listen carefully. We conclude that the Dominion voting system is intentionally and purposefully designed with inherent errors to create systemic fraud and influence election results. This isn't some crazy whack job saying this. This is a guy who does high-tech forensic analysis for government. He concludes that it was designed to intentionally generate an enormously high number of ballot errors. The electronic ballots are then transferred for adjudication. The intentional errors lead to a bulk adjudication of ballots with no oversight, no transparency, and no audit trail. This leads to voter or election fraud. Why is this so important to know about? Even if Joe Biden will 99% be our president, because this will be used again and again and again. If this county, maybe it's just this one county or just a few counties that actually committed voter fraud. I'm not saying they did or not saying that they didn't, but if they did, this will for certain happen again in future elections if we don't all know about this. That is the importance of getting to the bottom of hidden issues that not a lot of people are knowing about and the mainstream media is simply not covering. And so with that, I hope you will subscribe to this channel and become a member of the Utah Stories citizen journalists who basically help us produce our monthly magazine and also our website. We have an amazing team of reporters and people who are looking out for the interests of communities across Utah. I don't think that our communities cannot be overrun by corporate government collusion unless we are constantly looking out and being vigilant. So that's a big reason why I started Utah Stories. So go to utahstories.com, subscribe to our email newsletter, and get all of the new stories that we are working on. And subscribe to our channel and share this with a friend. We'd really appreciate it. With that, I thank Connie Lewis for helping with the program. Tyler Bond is our technical producer. Golda Hukic Markosian is our digital publisher. I hope to see you next time. We got some big stories coming out about more evidence that ranchers are being ripped off by developers with their water rights. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me.